This is part 2 of the Getting Started tutorial for new Blender users. I'm using version 2.63a, and in the first part we looked at navigating around the scene like this. Let's see, I'm holding the shift key and the middle wheel mouse, and I'm just going to move this down here to the scene a little bit like this here. And so in this tutorial we'll look at making the scene a little bit nicer to look at, because when it first starts up, this is kind of boring to me. Here's your grid floor. Well, this is interesting in that this is important to know about. These are marked off in Blender units, but really what's important is that when you design an object, say one object, maybe a car, that you design it at a certain scale, and then later on maybe you're creating a character of a person. Well, you don't want to create the car really small and then the character really big, and then in another object the tree really small, because then someday in the future you might want to try and mix and match the individual objects and they just won't be scaled the right way. So it's really important at the beginning to try and use a consistent scale between your objects. You can use meters or feet or whatever you choose, but just so you know when you enter in the numbers they represent something. So first thing is, see this cube here? Well, you know how I showed you could use Control Z to undo things, but I don't know how far back that was that I rotated this. So if I want to just clear the rotation to get it back to its normal rotation, I can use the Alt key followed by R. And before I do it though, I'm going to press N on the keyboard and bring up this little menu here, and I'm going to scroll to the top, and it tells me where this cube is located in the scene. It tells me in X, Y, and Z, and it tells me its rotation, and it doesn't have a scaling set with it right now. That's set at Unity. So let's just clear this location first. That'll put it back to the origin, which is right here in the middle. Notice that it has a red line that corresponds to the red arrow for the red x-axis, and a green line for the green axis. So there's another way to move an object. Before, you can grab an object, grab here, and I can move it on the x-axis as we've seen, but I can also press G followed by X, and then I can move it on the x-axis that way, like that. And you can see the values up in that menu changing. Alright, but so to clear that location, I just press Alt G, so Alt key and G simultaneously. So that puts it back to the origin, and you can see it's cleared everything to 0. And same with the rotation. Maybe it's rotated out of alignment and I want it to just start back to the beginning. So rotation was R, so I just press Alt R, like this. And then the last thing, if I was to scale the object by pressing S and then scaling it like this, the same thing. You notice I've changed the scaling parameters in here. If I press Alt S, I bring it down to its original location like this. Alright, so this navigation helps, and the other thing that helps is, I'm going to give this cube a color. Over here, I can change these windows a little bit. In fact, if I hold my mouse there, I can move this over like this, and I want to be able to do that so I can see all these menus right here. And one thing I want to do is I'm going to change this cube's color by pressing this tab right here. It's the material button. And when I'm in here, I want to press New. And then down here, right here, this is where you set the color. So I'll click that, brings up a wheel. I'll turn it green, and then moving the mouse over to here, I left click. So now I have a green cube. And then over in here, if you scroll down, here's the name of the cube, and well, for now we'll call it green cube. Usually I won't call it I won't use the color within the name because I might change the color, but just for the moment I'll just call it green cube. To distinguish it from, say, this one, I'll right click and give that a color and make that one red like this, and I'll call that red cube. Alright, so there they are, green cube and red cube like this, and you can actually see it up here. If I come up here above these menus, and when that indicator shows up, I can move this down, and there's the red cube, and I can click here and I can select the cubes this way as well. If I zoom out, I can select the lamp or the camera. Where was the lamp? There's the lamp up there. There's the lamp like that. Alright, so in fact, you notice when I select that lamp, it brings it highlights this and brings me into the lamp menu, tells me it's a point lamp, and that's the lamp color, and that's the amount of lamp energy that it has. But we'll come to that again. But let's get rid of this menu now by pressing N. And because what we're going to do is we're going to set up the lights just a little bit to make the scene easier to look at. And then I'm going to go over here in this menu here. He's kind of in my way, so I'll press T. I can bring it back with T at any time. That's the toolbar. And then I'm going to move the mouse cursor. Well, let me move this cube up out of the way real quick so you can see what I'm doing. Now I want to move, I'm going to add a plane to the scene, but I want to add it to the center. And right now my object is up here with the is where my cursor is going to be. Well, my cursor is there or there, but I want my cursor at the center, so I can press Shift S and move the cursor to the center. Alright. Now when I add a plane to the scene with Shift A, I'll go to Mesh, Plane, and then I'll press S and I'll just scale it up like that. And I'll press S and scale it again. And then I'm going to give that a color as well. From the material button, New, I'll make that say a light blue. And left click there. Alright, so now I have three things in the scene. But notice the light. I'll click the light, right click the light, I'll move it around, and you notice, well, it's a light, but generally it's not doing anything to the scene. A point light should actually affect the shading of this as I go. But it doesn't. And that's because down here on this menu, it says we're in, it shows us the method to look at, and this is solid mode. Alright, so it's just solid colors, so it's not really giving the lighting. You can look at it in wireframe mode or solid mode, but we're going to look at it in texture mode, like this. Alright, so I'll go back to solid for just a second, and then in you can use the keyboard to do the same thing by pressing Z, changes it between solid and wireframe, and when you're in solid mode, if you press Alt Z, it changes it to texture mode. You can see it changed it right there. Alt Z changes it back. So that swaps back and forth between those two, or when I'm in solid mode I can just Z between wireframe and this. But let's go into texture mode with Alt Z. My mouse has to be in that window because they're window context sensitive, and I'll move it around, but I'll go get another light. I'll move my mouse here. I'll click the cursor there with the left mouse, press Shift A, come down here to lamp, I'll get another point light, left click that. Alright, so there's a light, and you can see it's lit over here. I'll move that over here, and now you can see we actually see some lighting in the scene. And I'll move it up there, and now there's lights there. And so for me, that's how I like to get started, just by having basic lighting in the scene. And it really helps me design. So now if I left click and then press Shift A and add, say, a mesh and a cylinder to the scene, then it's easier for me to see. Of course, I come over here and press New and give that a blue color. Suddenly have three objects in the scene like that. And my scroll wheel, my middle mouse, is actually changing this intensity right here at the same time. And then I'll left click and set that there like that. So then it's easy to see objects in the scene like that. And if you want to move all three objects simultaneously, you can right click this one, then hold down the Shift key, right click that one, holding the Shift key, right click that, then I can move them up and down like that. Or remember, you can press G to move things, and I can just move them around in the scene like this, alright. And that kind of helps navigate through the scene. But you can add lights, there's many options from this point forward. And I say probably from this point forward, once you get this down to a size, just practice for a little bit, and then I have quite a few other tutorials, and you can find them just by looking at most of them say Blender 2.63a tutorial right now, but there'll be others for other versions of Blender in the near future, and they're kind of those tutorials are kind of application specific to the lesson. And well, this will at least get you started for the time being, and some of you may be off and running already. And alright, well, that's it for this lesson, and I'll see you in the next lesson.